As the hard problem of consciousness implies, there is no real evidence to support a theory where consciousness is produced from inside the brain. This is because consciousness is not local, does not exist solely inside a container of flesh and brain matter. Aspects of consciousness in the form of the human psyche are facilitated by the brain, but not generated by it. Consciousness has been wrongly assumed to be located within systems of organic matter called bodies, when in reality, and from the point of view of our actual experience, matter is located within the endlessly vast ocean of conscious experience. The best analogy for consciousness would be space, in which it has no physical borders. It's all pervasive, uncontainable, yet found in every container. For example, the space inside the house is the same as the space outside of a house, right? Now think of the body as the house walls, and the feeling of consciousness as the space inside the house or body. When the house gets bulldozed in a few decades, nothing happens to the space inside the house. It just merges with the space outside, like it was never separate. Like a drop of rain joining the ocean, there's no real distinction between where one ends and the other begins. Like space, everything is appearing within consciousness and is only possible because of it. Once this consciousness localizes, assuming the form of an independent mind identified with an organic object, i.e. human being, it tends to forget itself and operate through the finite limitations of the 5 bodily senses, which are then filtered to the brain-mind. Furthermore, consciousness, you, can be considered beyond mind and body, because body and mind are objects appearing within the conscious field of experience. This makes them objects of perception. This is why we say things like, my body or my mind. That kind of language is very intuitive because it points to a good question. Who is the my that we are referring to? When I say words like I, me, my, who or what do I mean? Beyond body and mind, I would and only could be referring to my intrinsic sense of existence. The intuitive feeling that I am a person who has an independent existence in this world. That is consciousness springing forth. Before thoughts come into play and begin to suggest, I am this or I am that, such as I am a doctor or I am a fighter, we just have this undoubtable raw feeling that we are. That is the feeling of consciousness. Thoughts then assign us a role, and the feeling is ignored, eclipsed by something temporary, but never gone. The closest analogy of consciousness in relation to mind, body, and the world might be of a hypothetically self-aware TV screen. Consciousness is the screen, and all the objects, colors, dramas, and words that appear on the screen are just local manifestations of it, aka people, places, and things in real life. They are not independent of the screen and do not affect the screen in any way. Rather, they are the various temporary manifestations of its unlimited potential. Say, for example, we plugged an Xbox into the screen and started playing a game. Eventually, our awareness may become accustomed to the screen, and it could vanish from our perception. The room might disappear, all other sounds may fade away, the contents of the game world may begin to take over our awareness. After a while of playing and really investing your focus into the game, you may get to a really difficult level that keeps you from progressing. After many tries and fails, you may even become emotionally disturbed from losing over and over. You may begin to get very angry. All it took to suffer in this way was to be ignorant of what was real. Life beyond the TV. And all it would take to be free from the emotional pain of the game is to remember you're so much more than it and its contents. The game never really even mattered in the grand scheme of things. You were just sitting on the couch, staring at Plato's cave. You have the option to zoom outwards, gain a greater perspective, and free yourself from your limited experience. When we apply the same exact logic to the world of matter and the dramas of our daily lives, and have a similar kind of awakening to life, that is what can be called enlightenment. The aha moment when we realize nothing matters, and so everything matters. The only reason we as humans seem to be experiencing the same world is because we're all tuning into the same channel, so to speak. We're all plugged into the same source or frequency of consciousness, the one mind, and so by default, we all seem to experience the same world. But even science will agree, these days, that the outside world is just a projection of the finite human mind. Whatever is actually out there, if you prefer materialist terms, is not what we are actually seeing after our senses have interpreted and translated it. The human organism, like all organisms, is built for survival, and its interpretations of reality are only approximations for the purpose of said survival. So maybe many of those ancient books, such as the Upanishads and the Corpus Hermeticum, who have stated over and over again for thousands of years that all is mind, maybe they deserve a closer inspection. The most effective meditations are achieved by this method of reflexive inquiry we previously spoke about. This raw feeling that I am will always be the first feeling that arises before any thoughts ever appear. Whatever thought that arises is going to present itself as either an image or a sentence. Either way, it takes a subject to perceive an object, and by definition, mental images and words are things that can be objectively described. Therefore, when we observe thoughts as objects, we can see a divide between the mind and consciousness. We witness a difference between the observer and the thing being observed. That observer is the very feeling of I am, which we just discussed, and it is what consciousness feels like when it first localizes itself in a finite form. It goes from infinite everything and collapses into an infinite I, and then I am, and then I am this or that. In Jewish mysticism, this is known as the Ein, the Ein Sof, and the Ein Sof Or, at which point it gets lost and forgets itself in the material world of forms and language. In objects of taste, touch, sound, smell, sight, mind, we completely forget our original nature and refuse to question the very notion of who is experiencing these things. This creates the illusion of the ego, or the false self. It's no wonder why the ancient Greeks were so obsessed with combating narcissism. Narcissism is just another name for the ego. It's also worth noting that in Latin, psyche actually means soul. In fact, when most ancient theologies or mythologies refer to a soul, they are really referring to what we call the psyche, or mind, prior to objective identification. Atman, if you will, the sense of I am. The beautiful thing about this perspective of consciousness is that it answers some very deep philosophical and religious questions in a very simple way. To get to this egoic state, we had to follow that subtle feeling of existence to the mind or body, and then to the objects of mind or body. So it should be possible for us to follow the string of awareness back the way we came, from objects of sense to the mind, hopefully allowing it to settle and rest in simple self-awareness, allowing us to rediscover that raw feeling, motionless consciousness once again. Curiously, animals don't have the same level of self-awareness as the human mind is capable of generating. Therefore, they do not have egos, but they do share the same feeling of I am as us by just being a localization of consciousness. What's interesting about this is that once the ego is disillusioned, all that remains is an all-pervading, unconditional love, the same love you would find in a newly born child or animal before the world of objects and people condition fear into the mind. This is the same love that all sages and mystics have referred to throughout all historical times. Rumi, Jesus, Buddha, even Bob Marley knew that there was only one love. Until an ego develops or traumas scar the mind, all conscious beings naturally emanate an unfettered form of love. We've all experienced a kitten sitting upright, paws crossed, eyes half open, purring louder than an engine jet. What is happening here? That kitten is basking in the pure bliss of consciousness, void of all thoughts, no fantasies about the future, no dwellings in the past. That kitten is completely anchored in the present moment. Why is it that humans are the only beings on this planet that somehow have a hard time simply just existing? You don't expect that kitten to have an existential crisis anytime soon, do you? Why not? Because they don't have the capability and burden of self-reflection and mind. Their responsibility is to just exist, while nature, the body, brain, senses, takes care of the rest. Beyond the thinking mind, there is a blanket of consciousness, and that consciousness is woven from love and peace. You are that. The discovery that marinating in our own being provides far more loving fulfillment than any objective experience could ever yield helps one end the search for happiness and knowledge. The truth of everything is revealed to be a pan-experiential yet single loving consciousness. Some religions call it God, some psychologists call it the unconscious mind, others call it Brahman, the Absolute, Father. Whatever metaphorical label you wish to give it is fine, since language is just a placeholder, made up of words and ideas, both of which don't come anywhere near the actuality. In the Old Testament, God's name in Hebrew was Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, which is, in English, I am that I am. In the same book, God also says to Moses, before Abraham, I am. You can approach almost any authentic religion with this model of consciousness in mind, and it will superimpose smoothly. For instance, why doesn't Jainism believe in harming any life form no matter what? Because each being refers to the same sense of I am that is God's infinite being. Why does Buddhism teach non-attachment? Because attaching yourself in the world of objective things causes one to overlook this infinite being that is conscious awareness. Why does Christianity and Judaism insist on monotheism? Because the worshipping of anything other than consciousness itself creates an objective idol in the mind, which by means of thought divides experience and collapses the oneness that is God. The realization that the feeling of I am in you is the presence of what all these theologies have called God ends the seeking stage of life. The realization that consciousness equals love equals truth brings the seeker to a silent, motionless ceasing of effort. The only feeling other than love left in this state is that of peace. There is peace because the realization that one is beyond both body and mind has implied an unbreakable relationship with something eternal and unchanging. The conditioned ego-mind-body we once identified with may not be able to survive the destruction of the body, but consciousness itself is untouchable. Disidentify with the mind and body, identify instead with consciousness of the feeling of I, and remain there. We already established that the true I that we refer to is the untouchable, eternal space of consciousness that all beings share. Therefore, we must be untouchable and eternal as well. Immortal. When a body dies, the conscious space inside, quote unquote, simply merges with the conscious space outside, like the house. When this realization sinks in, and one no longer fears death, life in any and all forms is no longer feared either. This produces a tremendous amount of freedom and brings peace and playfulness into the present moment, the only eternal moment that has ever existed. This is known in many Eastern schools as liberation or nirvana. In something like Nietzschean philosophy, this would be analogous to the child in his camel, lion, child symbolic system of human development. The camel being the carrier of life's burdens willingly, the lion being the willpower and wielder of the word no, and the child being the psychological reborn one, akin to the state of a child at play, the divine yes. Time as we know it has only ever existed from the point of view of the mind. When the mind is absent, time is not experienced, like during deep sleep. The mind disappears at night when we sleep, and as a result, the time between falling asleep and waking up feels almost non-existent. Same for the body. When there is no body present in awareness, no space present either. In other words, infinite consciousness filtered to the limitations of mind creates the illusion of time. Infinite consciousness filtered to the limitations of the 5 bodily senses, and subsequently mind, creates the illusion of space. In reality, there is only this infinite consciousness, free from any quality, quantity, or objectivity. This is why the experience of consciousness appears to be so evasive, so subtle. Sometimes it seems to appear as a void of blackness in sleep. Other times a bright light between the sun and my eyes. Sometimes a warm silence during meditation. It is eternal, loving awareness, and it is your true nature. When we get lost in the illusory ego, or the feeling that I am an individual entity in a world of separate things, we take on a lot of responsibility. It's a big weight to exist and not know why or how. We can overcome this weight just by knowing that the ego, the feeling of I am objectified, is a byproduct of thought. When I have a thought about something, I compose it by means of language. For example, I see a cup of coffee in front of me. The second that thought starts to describe the cup, the ego will arise automatically. The very moment language describes something, it has assigned it with objective quality. This is what language does. It's a very useful tool for communication with our species, and for exploring the material world of science and art, but not for knowing reality as it truly is. This is why most meditation schools say the chattering monkey mind needs to go. When something is objectified, a subject is automatically implied. The reality is that there is only one seamless experience happening at all times, like the screen analogy. But thoughts and images divide this wholeness, though only from the point of view of the mind. Things appear to have space and separateness on the screen, but wipe your finger across it and you'll see that it is seamless. We just need to zoom out a little and remember the screen. The images are just illusions, but you are not an illusion. You are not a character on the screen, though it may be fun to pretend for a while. You are the self-aware screen. Find out what you are experientially. Master the mind by going beyond it, and see that reality is really one single, fully complete experience happening here and now, indefinitely.